I wish I could share with you guys what he told us, but it's unspeakable. It's unspeakable.
Shore is now charged with 4 sex murders dating back 17 years.
He is not remorseful. He is an evil man. What he did is unspeakable.
People are defined by their actions. Well, I have done a lot of good things in my life, but I've also done a lot of bad things.
A lab in Dallas that 1 week ago linked Anthony Shore to one slaying.
I just wanted this whole thing to end. That's why I'm talking to you now.
I want to know the whole story.
I had a wife, I had 2 daughters, living in this nice neighborhood. I was working as a marketing representative. And every morning, I'd leave and go to work. One morning, this girl comes up and asks me for a cigarette while I was at the stoplight. I asked if she needed a ride, and I gave her a ride. I started giving her a ride on a semi-regular basis. She and I became more than friends. She and I became involved just in the sense of kissing, and that's not right. It's sick in the head because I understand she was not of age.
He starts off by providing his credentials as kind of Joe citizen, you know, with a wife and kids. And then says, on the other hand, I'm cultivating a relationship with a minor. The notion that they became friends or more than friends is kind of ludicrous.
Shore is engaging in grooming behavior, what we think of classically with pedophiles, where they are courting their victims and they're building a sense of security and trust with their victims so that they can go on to victimize them.
One day she saw me and asked me for a ride. I wanted to get more involved in just the kissing and stuff. And I undid her bra. Everything got out of hand. She freaked out. Said, no, this ain't going anywhere. She threatened to tell on me, you know, that I was a sick. And I had a life, and I just couldn't see it all thrown away. I panicked, and I didn't know what to do.
And what happened?
We got into a fight. I tried to knock her out. I took this cotton cord, and I tried to make sure that she would never, ever tell anybody. And I strangled her. And the cotton cord broke more than once. My fingers up.
This description about his injured finger is really a very blunt and obvious example of how narcissistic Anthony Shore is. This is not a surprising trait to see in individuals who are psychopathic.
He suggests that he did it because he panicked. But there's something that doesn't sit quite right in his narrative because he had something to strangle her with. And so I don't buy it. I think he was fantasizing about killing this poor young woman, and that part of his sexual thrill is befriending the woman.
So I drove up behind the Memphis, and I pushed her out of the car. Nobody ever came talk to me. Nobody ever came and arrested me. I tried to appear normal the best I could for months. Promised myself nothing like this would ever happen again.
He recognizes that he could be accused of rape and kidnapping. And he doesn't want to have this nice guy image blown. The fact that they never came looking for him was probably a more powerful reinforcer for it to happen again. Because, gee, if you can get away with this kind of thing, maybe you'll give it another shot.
I had crazy thoughts. I don't know if you call them demons. People talk about voices in your head. It's almost like my own voice, like it's a demon. And I'd see some girl walk in and I'd invite her. And then I'd have fantasy trips. One girl that I picked up once was a prostitute. I didn't pay for anything. She showed me some stuff. And nothing happened.
Because there was no fear, there was no need to overtake and prey on his victim, he wasn't aroused. His sexual arousal may be linked to the thrill of the chase, the thrill of pinning down victims who are scared, who are fighting. And the more they fight, the more he both becomes sexually charged and aroused, but the more angry he becomes also.
I had a song that was played on the prison show recently, Funk It Up by St. Vitus Dance. That was a band that I was in for several years back in the 90s.
You a musician guy?
Yeah, musician. I was a keyboardist. The basic gist of the poem that I wrote when I first got to death row, and it still applies today, is that, there should be a rockin' band. Dying is easy, it's living that's hard, everyone gets a one-way card. So when I'm dead and on my way, tomorrow's just another day. And it is, for all of us.
One morning, going to work, and I ran across this really beautiful young lady. She told me her name was Carmen, and she didn't take rides from strangers, and she didn't speak in English. And one morning it was light, misty rain, and she took a ride. There were other occasions I gave her a ride. And I became friends with her best I could. Tried to bone up on my Spanish so I could flirt with her and stuff, and lied that I was single and trying make a relationship happen. Once again, outside my marriage with this person.
Anthony Shore has distorted his sense of self. His private narrative of himself is that he is a man who struggled with fidelity issues, when in fact, the reality is he's a pedophile, he's a psychopath, and he's kidnapping and beating and raping these women, and goes on to then kill them. His detachment from reality is disturbing.
So why does he target young Latino girls? He very intentionally is targeting someone who's vulnerable, and we all know that if you don't speak good English, you're much more vulnerable, you're much less likely to seek help. Psychopaths go after vulnerable people because they don't want to be caught.
One morning we pulled in behind the Dairy Queen, and both amenable to a kiss. And when I pushed her further, it got out of hand and she freaked out. She just said, "Hey, man, not this way. I love you, but not this way, not here." I opened her blouse and she was resisting. Then I had this sick consumption that I wanted to possess her. She became real violent, just fighting, wanting to get out of the car. I got real paranoid because now this wasn't a consensual thing. I locked the door so she couldn't get out, and it didn't go well. And I didn't have sex with her, as it turns out, but I tried to. So I panicked, and once again, to avoid discovery, I strangled her.
He responds the way a psychopath responds, the way a sex offender responds. He locks the door and keeps her in the car. And no doubt her drive to fight, her drive to survive, likely was more of an arousal for him, and that is really a marker of sadism.
This is hyper-predation and manipulation. His story is that it's about rejection, but he's setting up the rejection carefully by befriending them, and when he's pretty sure that they've been groomed to trust him, he launches a provoked attack so that they will reject him. They're very mapped out executions, very carefully controlled, and they give him deep pleasure throughout the whole thing.
What did you strangle her with?
The nylon ligature. Because I had my hands up on the first one, I used some piece of wood and twisted it. I fished it and left the scene. I was sick. I was scared to death. I was paranoid for days.
Anthony Shore was known as the tourniquet killer. And he had the instruments he needed to make this more sophisticated ligature. Shore's choice to strangle the victim with a tourniquet allowed him to prolong the victim's death, to ensure that she was tortured, to ensure that the death was as slow or as fast as he wanted it to be. It makes him a very sophisticated, dangerous psychopath.
Probably the hardest thing in life is to forgive oneself. Forgiving others is pretty hard, believe me, I know. But to forgive yourself is a hard road to hoe, and I finally have come to the point where I've reached that peace in myself.
Well, aren't you lucky? You've forgiven yourself for killing innocent girls because they didn't want to have sex with you? It's a kind of laughable statement, and he's saying it in a serious manner.
To assume that he's forgiven himself would be to assume that he ever felt bad. He's not bothered by it. He feels good about who he is as a person.
I wanted to prove to myself that I didn't have to take a life. There was a girl that I had fantasies about. The girl's name was several times I've seen her coming home. I knew that she was a latchkey kid. So I had broken into the house and I waited for her to get there. And she got there. So I wore a t-shirt as a hood and sunglasses so it couldn't be recognized. I told her it was a burglary and tied her up with electrical cord and raped her. I started to strangle her and I thought, no, I just can't. I just need to get the out of here. Because I had promised myself I wasn't going to do this. So I bolted.
You see escalation. What could be more invasive than entering her own home and then violently raping her while she's tied up? He's taking more risks, and typically, this kind of killer, when they take more risks, it's because it gives them more thrill. He is a sexual psychopath. Befriending them and raping them is no longer exciting. I would even hazard a guess that he gets a thrill that he was able to control himself. This means he's really superior.
I left. I walked out back to work, scared to death. I was paranoid, God, for days. I was sure because I'd left somebody as a witness.
Even though we live back here on death row or behind these walls, there's still a quality of life to be had that is beautiful. I'm not saying there isn't a lot of chaos and despair, but I'm saying that ultimately it has to do with the choices you make. I make good choices.
I remember seeing this girl walking along. There was a parking lot and I pulled in. And I talked to her and she was friendly. There wasn't anybody around and I don't know what the hell went through my mind exactly. I just picked her up and threw her in the room and nobody saw it. I remember using duct tape to bind her hands and feet. And I told her to be quiet. I tried to have sex with her, but it wasn't happening. Strangely, she fought like hell.
He's getting more impulsive, but he's also getting more bold in the crimes that he's committing, because now he's just snatching children off the street. He's not even trying to engage in grooming behavior. And he's also given into the idea that he's going to kill the victims. He's gotten comfortable killing.
His sexual perversion runs deeper than is suggested by the previous victims. This is really, a preteen, a latency-age kid. So it really reflects depravity.
I knew I couldn't just let her go because obviously she's gonna go tell. So I did the literature. I just thought, God, you sick. What the hell is wrong with you?
Know this. I would love to get a stay. I would. That would be awesome. But at the same time, I'm ready for what happens next. It's kind of like when you get to the front of the line at the roller coaster ride. I'm excited to find out what happens. Most of us don't have the privilege of knowing when it's going to happen, so they don't prepare. I've had time to prepare and think about this.
I was driving around. I saw this girl. She was at a payphone, and she was mad. She started storming off. I just said, hey, would you like a ride? She says, man, I'm going to see my boyfriend somewhere. No problem. You jump right in. And we drove, wasn't anywhere near where she wanted to go. So I thought, hell, I'm gonna go for it. Go in this parking lot, and I started hitting on her. And she was jokingly, no, I got a boyfriend. So I grabbed her, pulled her into the back of the van. She fought. She bit me hard, drew blood. There wasn't gonna be any sex with her. So I restrained her, tied her hands, I taped her face, got completely undressed her. And I couldn't get aroused. I remember that. I just was so sick in my brain. I couldn't stop. And I used a twisted nylon rope.
This is a killer who likes watching his very young victims give up, lose hope, suffer, and watches the light fade from their eyes. He's a very, very cruel man.
His impulsivity was starting to spiral out of control. I think he was worried that he was losing control of himself.
I drove and drove and drove and drove. I was way the hell out. I pulled her out into a field and left like a bat out of hell, scared to death.
Dana was discovered naked and dead, having vanished 8 days earlier.
She was my friend. She was something very, very special. And she's gone.
One of his daughters finally got up the courage to talk about the molesting history. He would feed his daughters hot chocolate and was drugging them. Shore never really had an attachment for his children that wasn't self-focused. Drugging them to assure that it went undetected all these years, that he could continue to molest them and they would never fight back.
The man now charged with the crime, 41-year-old Anthony Allen Shore. Investigators say he confessed to carrying out 4 sex slayings.
Anthony Allen Shore, for the first time, walked into the courtroom that's likely to be the scene of his capital murder.
How much does Mama love you?
This much.
Oh, I love you more than that. Sophia was singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star because that's her favorite song. There's Sophia. Mommy. Can you see Mommy? I thought they were asleep. They weren't moving and her hand was cold. How does it make you feel? How does it make you feel? There was this purple mark on Sophia's face. And then I went and looked at Serena. But up on her leg here was a purpley color. And God's taking care of us now. You are the devil.
Communication center received a call that there was 2 dead children inside of an apartment.
Neighbors identified the little girls as Serena and Sophia, and their mother was the one who called police to their 4th floor apartment.
Now you understand that you've been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder?
Yes, I
Okay.
understand what you're saying.
And the charges are for murder in regards to both of your children. Okay. Only you know what was going on when this
They were
happened.
my babies.
They're your babies, I know.
Serena was playing in the living room, coloring, doing sign language. Sophia was having a bath. Everything was fine. They go to bed between 7 and 8 o'clock at night, every night. The next thing I know is I got people at my house. A guy with a blue outfit with orange on it in my bedroom.
Do you remember making the call? There was a phone call you made this morning.
That's the thing. There's a blockage. I don't remember.
In a nutshell, I don't believe her. Amnesia doesn't work that way. It's not persuasive. But that seems to be her narrative she's presenting, is everything was normal.
The next thing I know is there's people at my door.
She almost sounds childlike herself, helpless, frail. I think it was this vacillation between trying to decide if she wanted to come across as mentally unstable, that she had no memory of what she did, to really dissociating and not wanting to face the emotional reality that she's killed her children.
We were videotaping. We sing, joy, joy to the world, all the songs that they love.
Where do you think your children are now?
I assume my husband has.
You understand that both the children, Sophia and Serena, are both deceased?
I would scream. Most people would have a much more extreme reaction to first hearing that, if they really believed it 2 seconds ago that they were just with their dad. Even though she's crying, she's relatively calm, so that is very striking about her reaction. I'm a little skeptical about the authenticity of it.
With people who have psychopathy, we'll often see a meager effort at the display of emotion, sometimes a feigned effort if they can't muster enough of a feeling.
And I'm just gonna back up. So what happened last night?
Sophia was having a bath. It's like this usual routine that we always take.
So what happens when she's finished her bath?
She gets out of the tub and I dried her off. She was really, really tired.
Mm-hmm.
She gets bags underneath her eyes just like me. So I just got her in her pajamas and put her into bed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went up to the living room, was cleaning up everything. I had took a bunch of pills. I was getting really, really tired. I curled up with Sophia. She was cold.
Mm-hmm.
Usually they turn and cuddle in with me. They weren't cuddling in with me.
Mm-hmm.
And Sophia had weird colored lips.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at Serena, and she was looking weird too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I thought there was something wrong.
What she's describing is post-mortem effects for the children, and yet she's talking about them like they're alive and they're just injured. So there's a complete disconnect there. What we know is that after she drowned them, she dressed them in pretty little princess dresses, and she did up their hair, and she made them look beautiful, and then she put them to bed, dead. It's creepy on a lot of levels. Her ability to objectify her children and maintain her own narrative that was not based in reality allowed her to drown each of them.
At any point, did you push her under the water?
No. These are my babies. I've been trying to teach them not to be scared of the water.
But you do. How did they die?
I'm not allowed to speak without an attorney present.
Mm-hmm. Did you kill both of them?
I cannot speak without an attorney present.
You knew when you went to bed on Monday night that they weren't breathing and they weren't moving.
They were sleeping.
Elaine, they weren't sleeping. You were hoping you weren't going to wake up. If those pills would have worked and you went to sleep and you didn't wake up, what were your girls going to do?
I don't know.
Why don't you know that?
Because I don't know and I can't answer any more questions without an attorney.
Entertain suicide is because they want to have the final say.
You said you wanted to end your life. You wanted to end it all.
I wouldn't kill my babies. My babies are my life. What are you watching, you?
Sleeping Beauty.
Sleeping Beauty.
How much does Mama love you?
This much.
Oh, I love you more than that. How much does your Mama love you?
Here's Sophia.
Consistent with that, once they're dead, she dresses them up and lays them out so they are little sleeping beauties.
She made a strategic, calculated decision to videotape her children in their last moments. She's documenting what a fantastic mother she was, and yet she drowns them. Elaine Campione is somebody who is fused with her children. Her ego, her internal sense of self, is anchored by the existence and the narrative of, I am a perfect mother. She's speaking with positive affect. She has love in her voice in what she's saying to them, that mommy loves you. She's joking with them. There's a total disconnect.
And after the girls had their bath, you put them into their bed. Right. Somewhere in there, your children died because they did not wake up. And I asked you if you suffocated them.
I did not suffocate them.
And
I cannot answer any more questions until I have a legal advocate.
No, when we do the autopsy, are we going to find water in the lungs?
I'm not allowed to answer anything without an attorney.
One of the things that I wanted to make sure is that they did die peacefully. Peacefully.
Serena's 3 today. Yay!
What do you think, Sophia? You sing happy birthday? No?
I'm 3.
You're 3 today. Yay! Shall we go to the living room and see if you've got any birthday presents from the birthday fairies?
Yes!
I know you love them. I can tell that. I can see that in your eyes. I'm trying to understand what happened last night, and only you can tell me that.
I was videotaping my 2-year-old signing I love you, and my baby was in the tub, and that's all I remember. because Leo and I are very happy. Everything's gone. I hate you. I truly, truly hate you. You didn't care about our babies. You didn't care about me. You care about yourself. All you did was hurt us. You're an evil, horrible man. I'm just going to God, because God is the only one who cares and can protect me. Because you are the devil, Leo. You are the psychotic devil. At least the girls and I will be together in heaven, protected and safe from you.
Punish your husband. The psychopathic part is viewing the children as the implements.
I tried to overdose. I'm not meant to be. I don't care what you say. I want freedom from you. Why could you not let us go? My children have finally had freedom from you. This girl loved me. She loved me so much. But I betrayed her.
Her tone is less irate in this video. It's as if she's woken up unexpectedly, perhaps because she thought she was going to die, and she is trying to come to terms with this.
When we think of parents who are psychologically fused with their children, those children are their anchors for their personality. I think what we're seeing is the beginnings of the unraveling because her anchor is gone. She's killed them. She's more broken. This is a lot of fractured, damaged personality structure. She's two very different people in many ways. You have this woman who is presenting herself as very frail and beaten down, but then on the other hand, she's clearly very much in control of her decisions.
Legal papers were also found advising Campione to appear in court for a child custody hearing October 5th, the day after the girls' bodies were discovered. Leo Campione was trying to get custody of the girls at the time they were killed.
The custody aspect is a key element in this. So it's possible that she saw this as her only option to ensure definitively that he would not get to be with the girls.
And her response to it is, I'll take them and you won't ever get them. That's her power.
This was a note that Elaine took the time to write. It was directed at her husband, and it says, "All I wanted was a way out. The system failed. I was a great mother, and you wouldn't leave me alone. I had to protect our girls. They will sail away from this and all of you. I hate you." Her narrative is that she's actually doing something that's incredibly altruistic. And she's making it clear to her husband that he caused this. It's not her who drowned them. He pushed her to do this.
Doctors' notes revealed that Campione was having trouble seeing herself and children as separate entities. These pictures were used by the defense as evidence. Campione apparently told her mother to take it, saying she loved her kids and was fearful there would be no memory of her. Campione's lawyer argues her client is mentally ill, that she suffered from delusions and paranoia and didn't feel she or her children were safe.
Once she had a goal in mind, which was to kill them, to take them away from her husband, she's very systematic about how she goes about that goal. That's highly inconsistent with how people who experience delusions and paranoia behave. She is as psychopathic as she feels. She is self-righteous. She feels vindicated. She did something that no parent had the courage to do.
The jury didn't buy the defense argument that it was mental illness that made her do it and not a bitter custody dispute with her ex-husband.
There's nothing wrong with me mentally, there isn't.
Elaine Campione sobbed.
May 20th, 1992. The countryside south of Auckland was beginning to wake beneath a cold New Zealand sky. A thin layer of morning mist drifted across the rolling farmland around Parramatta, turning fences and paddocks into faint silhouettes. The first traces of daylight stretched over damp grass. Cattle stood motionless in distant fields. Somewhere beyond the tree lines, birds announced the beginning of another ordinary day. At least, it should have been ordinary. For the Schleipfer family, it would become the final sunrise most of them would ever see. By noon, 6 members of the same family would be dead. A mother, 3 sons, a daughter-in-law, an 11-year-old boy. The man responsible would not be a stranger hiding in the darkness. He would not be a drifter, a burglar, or a serial killer stalking the countryside. He would be the patriarch of the family itself. A 64-year-old farmer named Brian Schleipfer. The same man who had spent decades building the property. The same man whose hands had planted fences, repaired machinery, and worked the soil through countless winters. The same man whose surname was shared by every victim. And when the killing stopped, only one child would remain alive. A 9-year-old girl. Terrified. Alone. Hidden inside a house that had become a slaughter scene. Listening to the distant sounds of death echoing across family land. Waiting for police officers she could not see. Hoping her grandfather would not come back through the door. Years later, investigators would still struggle to explain exactly what happened inside Brian Schleipfer's mind that morning. There would be theories. Depression. Family conflict. Fear of losing control. Arguments over the future of the farm. A growing sense of isolation. But none of those explanations could fully answer the question that haunted everyone who studied the case. How does a man spend a lifetime building a family, only to destroy it in a single morning? The Schleipfer property covered more than 100 acres. Wide open land. Scattered buildings. Long driveways. Enough distance between houses that screams could vanish into the wind before reaching another doorway. To outsiders, it looked peaceful. The kind of place where generations could grow old together. The kind of place where children rode bicycles down gravel roads and family gatherings filled weekends with laughter. But appearances are deceptive. Sometimes the most dangerous storms are invisible. Sometimes they form slowly. Quietly. Over months. Over years. Hidden behind routine conversations. Hidden behind smiles at dinner tables. Hidden behind the ordinary rhythms of family life. And when they finally break, the destruction arrives all at once. That morning began with an argument. Nobody knows every word that was spoken. Nobody can reconstruct every second. But investigators later concluded that Brian and his wife, Jocelyn, became involved in a heated confrontation inside their home. Perhaps it began as many arguments do. A disagreement. A grievance carried from previous days. A frustration that refused to disappear. What is known is that something snapped. A line was crossed. A moment arrived from which there would be no return. Inside that farmhouse, Jocelyn Schleipfer was attacked with a knife. The woman who had shared decades of marriage with Brian became his first victim. The attack was sudden, violent, personal. The kind of violence that requires proximity. The kind that leaves no emotional distance between killer and victim. And once the first murder occurred, the path forward became horrifyingly clear. There would be no attempt to hide what happened. No effort to call for help. No effort to surrender. Instead, investigators believe Brian armed himself and began moving across the property. Searching. Hunting. Looking for members of his own family. One by one. The next victim was Carl Schleipfer. Drawn by the disturbance, he came to investigate. Perhaps he believed someone needed help. Perhaps he thought there had been another argument. Perhaps he simply heard a noise and wanted to know what was happening. Whatever thoughts were in his mind during those final moments disappeared with the blast of a shotgun. Then came the others. Daryl. Peter. Hazel. Young Aaron. Each name represented an entire world. Dreams. Plans. Memories. Relationships. Lives that extended far beyond a single tragic day. Yet within a matter of hours, those worlds would vanish. The killings unfolded across a property large enough to become a nightmare for responding officers. Every building. Every path. Every stand of trees. Every stretch of farmland potentially concealed either a victim or a killer. And somewhere in the middle of that nightmare, a desperate emergency call reached authorities. A call that would later become one of the most haunting recordings associated with a New Zealand murder case. Inside the home, Hazel Schleipfer reached for a telephone. It was an act of pure instinct. A final attempt to bring help before it was too late. On the other end of the line, emergency operators suddenly found themselves listening to chaos. Fear. Confusion. Voices. And then violence. The call did not end normally. It dissolved into terror. For the people hearing it, there was little they could do except send help as quickly as possible and hope they arrived before more lives were lost. But they were already too late. The killings continued. The farm became a landscape of panic. And hidden within that unfolding horror was a child named Linda. 9 years old. Too young to fully understand the complexities of adult conflict. Old enough to understand fear. Old enough to recognize death. Old enough to know that something terrible was happening around her. Imagine that scene. A child crouched in hiding. Trying not to breathe too loudly. Listening for footsteps. Listening for doors opening. Listening for the possibility that the person searching outside might find her next. The man she feared was not a stranger. Not a masked intruder. Not a monster from a storybook. It was her grandfather. The realization alone is almost impossible to comprehend. Trust is one of the first things children learn. Trust that family members protect them. Trust that home is safe. Trust that adults will keep danger away. In a single morning, every one of those beliefs shattered around Linda Schleipfer. And yet, amid circumstances that would overwhelm many adults, she managed to do something extraordinary. She survived. Not through strength. Not through luck alone. But through remarkable composure. While the nightmare unfolded, she remained hidden. She listened. She waited. And eventually, she spoke to police officers through a telephone connection that had remained open. Her voice became one of the few surviving witnesses to the massacre. A small voice emerging from overwhelming darkness. A voice describing events almost too terrible to imagine. Meanwhile, police officers rushed toward the property. As reports arrived, confusion spread. Initial information was fragmented. Incomplete. Officers knew people had been attacked. They knew firearms were involved. They knew children might be present. Most terrifying of all, they knew the killer was still somewhere on the property. Armed. Dangerous. And unpredictable. Every minute mattered. Every delay created the possibility of another death. Yet no one approaching the farm could fully grasp what awaited them. Because this was not simply a murder investigation. It was the collapse of an entire family. A family whose roots stretched across generations. A family that, from the outside, appeared deeply connected. A family now being erased from within. When investigators later reconstructed the timeline, they found themselves facing a disturbing pattern often seen in family annihilation cases. Not random violence. Not impulsive attacks against strangers. But targeted destruction. The systematic elimination of those closest to the offender. The people whose photographs filled family albums. The people whose birthdays had been celebrated together. The people who had shared meals, holidays, and decades of memories. There is something uniquely unsettling about crimes like these. They force us to confront a frightening possibility. That the greatest danger is not always outside the front door. Sometimes it is already sitting at the dinner table. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. Sometimes it knows every room in the house. Every hiding place. Every routine. Every weakness. And by the time anyone realizes what is happening, escape is no longer possible. The Schleifer family murders remain one of the darkest chapters in New Zealand criminal history. Not merely because of the number of victims. Not merely because of the brutality involved. But because of the devastating contrast at the center of the case. A family farm that should have represented stability became a killing ground. A grandfather became an executioner. And a little girl became the sole surviving witness to the destruction of nearly everyone she loved. This is the story of what happened on that cold May morning. The story of a family that seemed ordinary from the outside. The story of warning signs that may have gone unnoticed. The story of fear, loss, survival, and questions that remain unanswered more than 3 decades later. Because while the murders ended on May 20th, 1992, the mystery of why they happened never truly did. Long before the sirens arrived. Long before investigators walked through blood-stained rooms. Long before newspapers across New Zealand printed the Schleifer name beneath horrifying headlines. There was simply a farm. A stretch of countryside where life moved according to seasons rather than clocks. Where mornings began before sunrise and ended only after the last chore had been completed. Where generations measured time not in months or years, but in harvests, carving seasons, droughts, and winters. To understand what happened on May 20th, 1992, it is necessary to understand the world in which the Schleifer family lived. Because tragedies of this scale rarely emerge from nowhere. They grow in places. They grow in routines. They grow inside relationships. And sometimes they grow so slowly that nobody notices them until it is too late. The Schleifer property sat near Parramatta, south of Auckland, in a region known for rich farmland and rolling green landscapes. Visitors arriving for the first time would have seen exactly what they expected from rural New Zealand. Wide open paddocks stretching toward distant tree lines. Gravel roads winding between fields. Clusters of farm buildings weathered by decades of wind and rain. Machinery parked beside sheds. Livestock moving lazily beneath broad skies. It was the kind of place that looked peaceful enough to belong on a postcard. A place where city people imagined life was simpler. Quieter. Safer. But farming life has never been simple. Behind every beautiful landscape lies relentless work. Before dawn, farmers rise. After sunset, they continue. Animals require attention regardless of weather. Machinery breaks. Markets fluctuate. Debt accumulates. Unexpected setbacks arrive without warning. The land gives, but it also demands. Year after year. Season after season. And for men who dedicate their entire identity to the land, the farm often becomes more than property. It becomes a reflection of who they are. Their pride. Their purpose. Their legacy. For Brian Schlaepfer, the farm represented all of those things. By the early 1990s, he was 64 years old. An age when many people begin stepping back from responsibility. An age when retirement becomes a realistic possibility. Yet farmers often view retirement differently. Many continue working long after others would stop. Not because they have to. Because they do not know how not to. The farm becomes woven into their identity. Without it, they struggle to answer a simple question. Who am I now? People who knew Brian described a man shaped by years of agricultural life. Strong-willed. Independent. Accustomed to solving problems himself. The sort of man who had spent decades making decisions without asking permission. The sort of man who expected things to be done properly. The sort of man who carried both pride and stubbornness in equal measure. For years, those traits may have helped him succeed. In farming, determination is often rewarded. Persistence matters. Discipline matters. Control matters. But characteristics that build a life can also become dangerous when circumstances begin to change. Especially when control starts slipping away. The Schlaepfer family was not scattered across different cities. They lived close together. Very close. Multiple family members occupied homes on or near the same property. Their lives intertwined through work, proximity, and shared history. From the outside, many people would have considered this arrangement ideal. Children growing up near grandparents. Brothers working together. Family support available only a short walk away. Meals shared. Responsibilities divided. A sense of continuity connecting one generation to the next. Yet closeness can be complicated. The closer people live together, the fewer opportunities exist to escape conflict. Arguments linger. Disagreements remain visible. Resentments have room to grow. In many families, distance acts as a pressure valve. People cool off. They return home. Time softens frustration. But on a family farm, especially one involving multiple generations, conflicts can become permanent fixtures of daily life. Every unresolved issue reappears the next morning. And the morning after that. And the morning after that. For years, the Schlaepfer family worked side by side. The sons grew into adulthood within the shadow of the farm. The land that had shaped their father now shaped them as well. Like many farming families, questions about the future eventually emerged. Who would manage the property? Who would make decisions? What would happen as older generations aged? How would responsibilities be divided? These conversations occur in farming communities across the world. Most families navigate them successfully. Others do not. Because beneath practical discussions often lie emotional realities. Control. Identity. Legacy. Power. A farm is rarely just land. It represents years of sacrifice. Years of labor. Years of dreams. When ownership or management begins shifting toward younger generations, older family members sometimes experience profound uncertainty. Not because they dislike their children. Because change can feel like erasure. The farm they built begins becoming someone else's farm. Their role begins shrinking. Their authority begins fading. For some individuals, that transition is painful. For others, it becomes unbearable. Investigators later explored reports suggesting tensions had developed within the Schlaepfer family regarding the future of the property and decision-making responsibilities. Exact details remain unclear. Many conversations disappeared forever with those who died. But enough information emerged to suggest that disagreements existed. Disagreements significant enough to attract attention after the murders. Perhaps they seemed ordinary at the time. Many families argue. Many families disagree. Most disagreements never become violence. That reality makes family annihilation cases so difficult to predict. The warning signs often appear ordinary until viewed through the lens of catastrophe. A tense conversation. A bitter argument. A withdrawn mood. A growing resentment. Events that seem insignificant until investigators look backward and discover where they eventually led. By the early 1990s, there were also indications that Brian's mental and emotional state had deteriorated. Reports later suggested he had been struggling with depression. Not the kind of sadness that arrives for a few days and disappears. Something deeper. Something heavier. Something capable of reshaping the way a person experiences the world. Depression is often invisible. Especially among older men. Especially among individuals raised in environments where emotional vulnerability was rarely discussed. For many people of Brian's generation, struggles were endured rather than shared. Problems were carried privately. Pain remained hidden. Seeking help could feel impossible. Admitting weakness could feel shameful. So suffering occurred behind closed doors. Silently. Gradually. A person might continue showing up every day. Continue working. Continue speaking with neighbors. Continue appearing normal. While internally, something deteriorated. Those closest to them sometimes notice changes. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes the individual becomes skilled at concealing what they feel. And when tragedy eventually arrives, people are left wondering how nobody saw it coming. The truth is often complicated. Human beings are remarkably effective at hiding their pain. The farm itself reinforced isolation. Rural life offers beauty. But it can also offer loneliness. Long hours. Limited social contact. Physical exhaustion. Distance from support systems. For someone experiencing depression, those factors can become dangerous. Every difficult thought echoes longer when there are fewer distractions. Every fear gains strength in isolation. Every resentment finds room to grow. And according to later investigations, Brian appeared increasingly isolated from members of his own family. Not physically. Emotionally. The distinction matters. A person can sit at the same dinner table as loved ones and still feel completely alone. A person can spend every day surrounded by family while becoming disconnected from them. Isolation is not always measured in miles. Sometimes it is measured in understanding. In trust. In communication. In the feeling that nobody truly sees what is happening inside your mind. As months passed, the gap between Brian and others may have widened. Nobody can know exactly what thoughts occupied his mind during that period. The deadly behind silence. And silence creates space for endless questions. Did he feel betrayed? Did he fear losing authority? Did he believe his family no longer respected him? Did depression distort his perception of ordinary disagreements? Did he see threats where none existed? Or were there deeper struggles that nobody ever recognized? Those questions remain unanswered. What is clear is that the atmosphere surrounding the family was not as peaceful as the landscape surrounding their homes. Beneath green fields and open skies, tensions existed. Perhaps hidden. Perhaps ignored. Perhaps underestimated. The tragedy had not yet begun. But some of the ingredients were already present. A proud man. Advancing age. Depression. Isolation. Conflict. Fear of losing control. Individually, none guaranteed violence. Together, they formed a troubling picture. Yet even then, nobody could have imagined what was coming. Because daily life continued. People woke up. Worked. Cooked meals. Made plans. Laughed. Argued. Dreamed about the future. The victims did not know they were living through the final chapter of their lives. Jocelyn did not know. Carl did not know. Daryl did not know. Peter did not know. Hazel did not know. Young Aaron certainly did not know. Children never imagine tomorrow might not arrive. They think in school days, birthdays, holidays, summer adventures. The future stretches endlessly ahead. Aaron was only 11 years old. An age filled with curiosity. An age when the world still feels enormous. An age when family is supposed to mean safety. The same was true for Linda. At 9 years old, her concerns should have been simple. School. Friends. Games. The small dramas that occupy childhood. Not survival. Not hiding. Not death. Yet the ordinary world around her was moving toward catastrophe. And nobody recognized it. That is one of the most chilling aspects of this story. The contrast. One day the farm appeared normal. The next day it became infamous. One day the family existed. The next day most of it was gone. History often creates the illusion that disaster was inevitable. But for those living through it, the future remains invisible. On the evening before the murders, the Schläpfer property likely looked much as it always had. Lights glowing from windows. Vehicles parked outside homes. Family members settling into routines. Perhaps conversations around kitchen tables. Perhaps plans for the following day. Perhaps worries that seemed important at the time but would soon become meaningless. Nobody knew the sunrise approaching over the fields would be their last. Nobody knew a family argument would escalate into unimaginable violence. Nobody knew a child would become the sole survivor of one of New Zealand's most devastating family massacres. The countryside slept beneath a calm sky. The farm stood quiet. The houses remained warm. The fields remained still. And somewhere within that silence, unseen by everyone around him, Brian Schläpfer was moving toward a decision that would forever alter the lives of everyone connected to his name. When dawn finally arrived on May 20, 1992, it carried no warning. The grass glistened with moisture. The air remained cool. The landscape appeared unchanged. Yet within a few short hours, the Schläpfer farm would transform from a family home into a crime scene. And the quiet world that had taken decades to build would collapse forever. When people talk about murder cases, the story often becomes dominated by one person. The killer. His actions. His motives. His psychology. His darkness. The victims slowly fade into the background, becoming little more than names listed in newspaper articles or court records. A paragraph. A photograph. A date of birth. A date of death. And then the world moves on. But before the Schläpfer family became the center of one of New Zealand's most horrifying family massacres, they were something far more important than victims. They were people. People who laughed. People who argued. People who dreamed about futures they believed they still had time to reach. People who woke up on the morning of May 20th expecting an ordinary day. To understand the true weight of what happened on that farm, we have to step away from the violence for a moment. We have to meet the people whose lives ended there. Because the tragedy is not measured by the number 6. It is measured by everything those 6 lives contained. The heart of the family was Jocelyn Schläpfer. For decades, she had stood beside her husband Brian through the demanding realities of rural life. Farming marriages are rarely easy. They are built on sacrifice. Long hours. Financial uncertainty. Physical exhaustion. Years spent weathering challenges together. The work never truly ends. Neither does the responsibility. Yet generation after generation, farming families survive because of people like Jocelyn. People who become the quiet center around which everyone else revolves. The kind of woman who remembers birthdays. Who notices when someone is struggling? Who keeps family traditions alive? Who turns a house into a home? The public record preserves only fragments of who she was. But even fragments tell a story. She was a wife, a mother, a grandmother. Every one of those roles carries thousands of moments invisible to history. Bedtime stories, family dinners, holiday celebrations, advice offered during difficult times, comfort during heartbreak, pride during achievements. The countless ordinary interactions that create a lifetime. When investigators later reconstructed the final day, they identified Jocelyn as the first victim. A fact that adds another layer of sadness to the story. Because whatever tensions existed within the family, she had shared decades of life with the man who ultimately killed her. Entire lifetimes of memories. Years that should have represented partnership and trust. Instead, those years ended in violence. Not far away lived the next generation. Among them was Karl Schläpfer, a son who had grown up beneath the influence of both the farm and his family. Like many children raised in agricultural communities, much of his life had likely been shaped by responsibility from an early age. Farm children often learn lessons different from those taught in classrooms. They learn the value of work, the importance of reliability, the reality that animals and crops do not wait for convenience. Responsibilities become part of daily life long before adulthood arrives. By the time Karl became a grown man, those lessons had become part of who he was. The farm was not simply a workplace. It was part of his identity, part of his family's story, part of his future. What dreams did he have? What plans occupied his thoughts during those final weeks? History cannot answer those questions. But every human life contains unfinished chapters. Karl had them too. There were places he had not visited, experiences he had not yet lived, conversations he had not yet had, a future extending beyond the horizon of that May morning, a future he never reached. One detail from the case remains especially heartbreaking. Investigators believe Karl responded after hearing signs of trouble. If true, his final actions were not motivated by self-preservation. They were motivated by concern. He moved toward danger because someone he loved might need help. That instinct says something about character, something about loyalty, something about family. And it cost him his life. Then there was Darrell Schläpfer. Another son. Another life tied to the family property. Another chapter permanently interrupted. When discussing cases involving multiple victims, there is always a danger of reducing individuals to statistics. One more victim. One more casualty. One more name. But every victim represents an entire universe. Darrell's universe disappeared that day. The people who loved him lost more than a family member. They lost a unique individual whose exact combination of experiences, memories, strengths, flaws, and personality traits would never exist again. That is what homicide truly destroys. Not merely a body. A future. An irreplaceable perspective. A human story. The same was true for Peter Schläpfer. A son. A brother. A member of a family that had spent years building lives together on shared land. Families are complicated. No family exists without disagreements. No family exists without misunderstandings. People irritate each other. People disappoint each other. People hurt each other's feelings. Yet beneath those imperfections lies something powerful. Connection. Shared history. The understanding that no matter where life leads, there are people who remember where you started. Peter shared that connection with everyone living on the farm. His memories intertwined with theirs. Childhood experiences. Family milestones. Private jokes. Moments nobody outside the family would ever fully understand. All of that disappeared alongside him. Then there was Hazel Schleipfer, a daughter-in-law who became one of the most important figures in the final moments of the tragedy. Because while many details of the massacre remain hidden behind time and death, Hazel left behind something extraordinary. Evidence of courage. Evidence of determination. Evidence of a desperate fight to save lives. As events spiraled into chaos, Hazel managed to reach a telephone and call emergency services. It is difficult to imagine the fear she must have been experiencing during those moments. Fear has a way of narrowing the world. The mind focuses on survival. Heartbeats become thunderous. Thoughts become fragmented. Time itself seems distorted. Yet amid unimaginable terror, Hazel acted. She reached for help. Not everyone manages to do that under extreme stress. Many people freeze. Many people become overwhelmed. Hazel did not. She tried to bring assistance to her family. The attempt ultimately could not stop the tragedy. But her actions remain one of the most powerful examples of courage within the entire case. Even today, decades later, that phone call continues to echo through discussions of the murders. Not because of its technical significance. Because of its humanity. Because it reminds us that behind every crime scene are people desperately trying to survive. Desperately trying to protect those they love. Desperately hoping help will arrive in time. Hazel's story is inseparable from that reality. Then there was Aaron. Only 11 years old. The youngest victim. Perhaps the most difficult life to think about. Because childhood deaths carry a particular kind of sorrow. Adults have opportunities to live their lives. Children are still waiting for theirs to begin. At 11 years old, the future should feel endless. School years still ahead. Teenage years waiting to arrive. First jobs. First loves. Dreams not yet fully formed. Possibilities stretching in every direction. Aaron never received those opportunities. The details preserved in official records tell us little about who he was as a person. But perhaps that silence itself is meaningful. Children are not defined by achievements. They are defined by potential. By who they might become. Aaron's future was stolen before anyone could discover what that future would hold. Would he have become a farmer? A teacher? A mechanic? A father? A traveler? Nobody knows. And nobody ever will. That uncertainty is one of the cruelest consequences of violence. The destruction extends beyond what exists into everything that might have existed. Every birthday Aaron never celebrated. Every friendship he never formed. Every accomplishment he never achieved. Every memory he never created. All gone. And then there was Linda. The sole survivor. The child whose life became divided into two distinct periods. Before May 20th. And after May 20th. At 9 years old, she occupied a unique place within the family. Young enough to remain protected by adults. Old enough to observe the world around her. Children notice more than adults often realize. They watch conversations. They notice moods. They sense tension. They learn family dynamics long before they fully understand them. Yet no amount of awareness could have prepared Linda for what she would witness. The people around her were not simply relatives. They were her world. Children measure safety through familiarity. The faces they see every day become anchors. Parents. Grandparents. Siblings. Uncles. Aunts. The people who make life feel stable. When violence enters that environment, it does more than create fear. It destroys certainty itself. And Linda would experience that destruction firsthand. In many ways, the Schleipfer family reflected countless rural families across New Zealand. Multiple generations connected by land, history, and shared responsibility. They worked together. lived near one another, built lives around common roots. Nothing about their daily existence suggested they would become national news. Nothing suggested their names would eventually appear in crime documentaries and true crime discussions decades later. That is part of what makes this case so disturbing. The victims were not living on the margins of society. They were not engaged in dangerous criminal activity. They were not surrounded by obvious chaos. They were a family. A family navigating ordinary challenges. A family living ordinary lives. Until one morning changed everything. When people think about mass murder, they often imagine explosive violence emerging from nowhere. But family annihilation cases are different. The victims usually trust the offender. They share meals with him, speak with him daily, welcome him into their homes. The danger does not arrive from outside. It grows within the family itself. That reality makes the loss suffered by the Schläfer victims even more profound. The threat came from someone they knew. Someone whose presence was familiar. Someone who had occupied a central place in family life for decades. They had no reason to expect what was coming. No reason to believe an ordinary morning would become their final morning. And that is perhaps the most heartbreaking truth of all. On May 19th, they were not victims. They were simply people living their lives. Jocelyn was a wife, mother, and grandmother. Carl was a son and family member concerned enough to investigate signs of trouble. Daryl was a man continuing the story of his own life. Peter was another thread within the fabric of the family. Hazel was a woman whose courage would emerge in the worst possible circumstances. Aaron was a child standing at the beginning of life rather than the end. Linda was a little girl who still believed the adults around her could keep her safe. Each of them went to sleep expecting another tomorrow. Each of them carried plans beyond the next sunrise. Each of them believed they still had time. None of them knew that the final chapter of their story was already approaching. And as dawn prepared to rise over the fields of Perata, the lives of the Schläfer family moved quietly toward the most devastating morning any of them would ever face. The morning of May 20th, 1992, began like countless mornings before it. The sun had not yet fully claimed the sky above Perata. A pale grey light hung over the farmland, slowly pushing back the darkness that lingered across the fields. Moisture clung to the grass. The air carried the familiar chill of a late autumn morning in rural New Zealand. Nothing about the landscape suggested that history was about to be written. Nothing warned that within a matter of hours, an entire family would be shattered. The farm was waking up. Somewhere on the property, routines were beginning. Doors opening. Kettles warming. People preparing for another day of work. The ordinary rhythm of life continued, unaware that it was moving toward a point of no return. At the center of everything stood Brian Schläfer. For decades he had been the patriarch. The man whose decisions helped shape the future of the property. The man who had watched children become adults and grandchildren enter the world. The man who had spent much of his life believing he understood the land beneath his feet. Yet on this particular morning, something inside him appeared fundamentally different. The exact sequence of events can never be fully known. The only person who could have explained every thought and every decision died before the day ended. What investigators later reconstructed came from physical evidence, timelines, witness accounts, and the fragments left behind by a tragedy that unfolded with terrifying speed. At some point during the morning, an argument erupted between Brian and his wife, Jocelyn. Arguments are common within families. Especially families carrying years of history. Especially couples who have spent decades together. Most arguments begin with words and end with silence. This one did not. Something happened inside that house. Something powerful enough to transform frustration into violence. Something that crossed a line from which there would be no return. Investigators concluded that Jocelyn became the first victim. The woman who had shared years of marriage with Brian suddenly found herself facing danger inside her own home. The place that should have represented safety became the beginning of a nightmare. No one knows what passed through her mind during those final moments. Perhaps shock. Perhaps disbelief. Perhaps confusion. The human mind often struggles to process betrayal in real time. When danger comes from a stranger, fear arrives quickly. When danger comes from someone trusted for decades, understanding sometimes lags behind reality. The brain searches desperately for another explanation. This cannot be happening. This must be a misunderstanding. This will stop. But it did not stop. And once the first life had been taken, the course of the day changed forever. The violence that began inside the house did not remain there. It expanded outward. Like cracks spreading through glass. Like a storm breaking through a dam. The tragedy moved from one victim to the next. One life to another. One generation to another. Somewhere on the property, Karl Schläpfer became aware that something was wrong. Perhaps he heard raised voices. Perhaps he heard movement. Perhaps instinct simply told him that something required attention. What matters is that he responded. He moved toward the disturbance. Toward the source of concern. Toward what he likely believed was a family problem requiring intervention. That decision would cost him everything. Investigators later concluded that Karl became the next victim. One moment he was a son responding to trouble. The next, he was part of the unfolding massacre. There is a particular tragedy in that sequence. Karl was not running away. He was moving toward what he believed needed help. Many acts of courage begin exactly that way. Not with heroism. With concern. A simple decision to check on someone. A simple decision to help. The farm remained spread across more than 100 acres. Distances separated buildings. Open land stretched between homes. Under ordinary circumstances, those distances offered privacy. On this morning, they created isolation. People could not immediately see what was happening elsewhere on the property. Events unfolded in fragments. Disconnected pieces of a catastrophe still taking shape. As Brian moved through the farm, the circle of danger widened. Daryl. Peter. Members of the same family who had spent years living within sight of one another. Years sharing holidays, responsibilities, and memories. Years believing that family bonds meant protection. What occurred next unfolded over a relatively short period of time. Yet for those experiencing it, time may have felt distorted. Moments of terror often do that. Seconds stretch. Thoughts race. Reality becomes fragmented. The future shrinks until only immediate survival matters. Somewhere amid the chaos, awareness began spreading. Something terrible was happening. Something far beyond an ordinary disagreement. Fear entered homes. Questions emerged. What is going on? What happened? Where is everyone? And perhaps most frightening of all, who can be trusted? One of the most haunting aspects of family annihilation cases is the collapse of familiarity. The people we know best become part of our mental map of safety. Children trust parents. Spouses trust each other. Relatives trust relatives. Entire lives are built around those assumptions. When those assumptions break, the emotional shock can be as devastating as the physical threat itself. The Schläpfer family found themselves trapped inside exactly that nightmare. The danger was not approaching from outside the property. It was already there. Already moving among them. Already changing lives forever. Then came one of the most significant moments in the entire case. Hazel Schläpfer reached for a telephone. Imagine that moment. Imagine standing inside a home while fear spreads through every room. Imagine trying to understand events that seem impossible. Imagine realizing that immediate help is needed. The decision to call emergency services may have taken only seconds. Yet those seconds became part of New Zealand criminal history. Hazel contacted 111. On the other end of the line, emergency personnel answered what likely seemed at first to be another routine call. Within moments, it became clear that something extraordinary was unfolding. The voice they heard belonged to someone caught inside a rapidly developing crisis. A crisis that nobody fully understood. Not yet. Emergency operators are trained to remain calm, to gather information, to guide callers through chaos. But some situations exceed preparation. Some situations carry a sense of dread that can be felt even through a telephone line. This was one of them. As the call continued, fragments of the situation emerged. Confusion. Urgency. Fear. The sound of a family under attack. The operators listened while events continued unfolding in real time. Unable to physically intervene. Unable to stop what was happening. Able only to gather information and send help racing toward the property. For the people on that line, every second mattered. Yet the distance between police and the farm could not be erased. Officers were coming. But they were not there yet. Meanwhile, the nightmare continued. The emergency call would later become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence associated with the case. Not because of sensationalism. Because it captured human vulnerability. The terrifying reality of people confronting danger they never expected to face. Somewhere during those same moments, another life was hanging in the balance. 9-year-old Linda Schleipfer. The only survivor. The child whose experience would forever define the tragedy. Children understand fear differently than adults. They may not grasp every detail. They may not understand motives. But they recognize danger. They recognize panic. They recognize when something is terribly wrong. As violence spread through the family property, Linda found herself inside circumstances no child should ever experience. People she knew were disappearing. Adults who should have provided safety were suddenly unable to do so. The world around her was changing with terrifying speed. At some point, survival became her only concern. She hid. Not because she understood the full scale of events. Because instinct told her to. Because every warning signal inside her young mind was screaming the same message. Stay quiet. Stay hidden. Do not let anyone find you. Outside, the farm remained deceptively calm. The fields were still there. The tree still stood motionless. The sky continued brightening as morning advanced. Nature remained indifferent. The contrast was almost surreal. A peaceful rural landscape containing unimaginable fear. Investigators would later spend countless hours reconstructing the timeline. Determining who was where. Determining how events unfolded. Determining the sequence of actions that transformed a family property into a crime scene. But even the most detailed reconstruction cannot fully capture the emotional reality of that morning. Because timelines record movement. Not error. Evidence records facts. Not heartbreak. Reports record conclusions. Not the human experience of living through those moments. What remains clear is that by the time emergency services understood the scale of the crisis, multiple lives had already been lost. The family was being destroyed from within. And the person responsible remained at large somewhere on the property. Armed. Dangerous. And increasingly unpredictable. As police units moved toward the farm, uncertainty dominated the situation. How many victims were there? How many people remained alive? Where exactly was Brian? Was he still searching for family members? Would he confront police? Would there be a hostage situation? Nobody knew. Every possibility remained open. Every possibility carried risk. The responding officers were entering a landscape filled with unknowns. Yet while police raced toward the scene, Linda remained hidden. Alone. Waiting. Listening. The passage of time must have felt endless. Minutes becoming hours. Every sound carrying potential danger. Every silence carrying uncertainty. Somewhere beyond her hiding place, the lives she had known were disappearing forever. And she had no way of knowing whether she would survive. The remarkable detail that continues to stand out decades later is not merely that Linda survived. It is how she survived. At an age when most children rely entirely on adults for protection, she was forced to rely on herself. At an age when many children fear the dark or worry about school assignments, she was confronting a reality most adults could scarcely endure. Eventually, after the immediate danger moved elsewhere, Linda returned to the telephone connection that remained open. A child speaking into the aftermath of horror. A child providing information to people she could not see. A child helping authorities understand what had happened. The courage required for that moment is difficult to overstate. Not dramatic courage. Not cinematic heroism. Something quieter. Something perhaps even more powerful. The courage to keep functioning while terrified. The courage to speak when silence would have been easier. The courage to survive. By late morning, the Schläpfer family as it had existed for decades was effectively gone. The damage could not be undone. The lives already lost could not be recovered. And somewhere on the property, Brian Schläpfer remained the focus of an increasingly urgent search. The massacre itself was ending. But the investigation was only beginning. Police had not yet located him. Questions vastly outnumbered answers. The full extent of the tragedy remained hidden among houses, paddocks, and farm buildings scattered across more than 100 acres of land. What officers were about to discover would shock even experienced investigators. Because the peaceful farm they were approaching was no longer simply a family property. It had become the scene of one of the most devastating family annihilations in New Zealand history. The first police units did not arrive knowing they were about to step into one of the darkest crime scenes in New Zealand history. They arrived carrying fragments. A disconnected collection of information gathered from an emergency call that had abruptly descended into chaos. Reports of violence. Reports of gunfire. Confusion about who was injured. Confusion about who remained alive. Most troubling of all, uncertainty about the location of the person responsible. As emergency vehicles moved through the countryside toward the Schläpfer property, the situation remained fluid. Nothing was fully confirmed. Nothing was fully understood. Officers knew there was danger ahead. They simply did not know how much. The roads leading toward the farm wound through familiar rural scenery. Fields stretched across the landscape. Fences divided sections of farmland. The countryside looked unchanged. Ordinary. Peaceful. The kind of environment where police officers might expect disputes over livestock, property boundaries, or minor local incidents. Not mass murder. Not an active crime scene spread across more than 100 acres. Not a killer who had already erased most of his own family. As units approached the property, caution replaced speed. The information available suggested the suspect might still be armed. That changed everything. Every building became a potential threat. Every open doorway became a source of uncertainty. Every movement demanded attention. Police officers are trained to confront danger. Yet training does not remove fear. It simply teaches people how to function despite it. The officers entering the Schläpfer farm understood that someone capable of extreme violence might still be nearby. Waiting. Watching. Preparing. And unlike many criminal investigations, this was not a search through city streets crowded with witnesses. This was open farmland. Wide spaces. Scattered structures. Countless locations where an armed individual could remain hidden. The first moments on the property were marked by an eerie contradiction. The environment appeared calm. Almost too calm. No crowds. No visible chaos. No obvious indication of the devastation hidden beyond walls and around corners. The silence itself became unsettling. Crime scenes often carry an atmosphere that investigators describe years later. Not because of anything supernatural. Because human intuition recognizes when something is wrong. The absence of normal activity becomes noticeable. The absence of voices. The absence of movement. The absence of life where life should exist. The Schleipfer property carried that feeling. Something terrible had happened here. The land seemed to know it before the investigators fully did. As officers advanced deeper into the property, they began making discoveries. Each discovery answered one question and created 10 more. The first confirmed victims transformed a serious emergency into a catastrophe. This was no longer a single homicide. No longer an isolated act of violence. The scale was becoming clear. Family members were dead. Multiple family members. The realization spread quickly through responding personnel. Communication intensified. Additional resources were requested. The operation expanded. Because if multiple victims had already been found, there was every reason to believe others remained unaccounted for. And somewhere among them might be survivors. That possibility drove everything. Police could not afford to assume everyone was dead. Not yet. Every minute carried the possibility of saving a life. Every room had to be checked. Every structure had to be searched. Every lead had to be pursued. The property effectively transformed into a battlefield of uncertainty. Teams moved methodically. Training took over. Clear buildings. Establish positions. Communicate constantly. Maintain awareness. The procedures were familiar. The circumstances were not. Most officers spend entire careers without encountering a crime scene of this magnitude. Many never encounter a family annihilation. Even fewer encounter one unfolding across such a large rural area. As the search continued, the full horror gradually emerged. Victims were discovered in different locations. The pattern suggested deliberate movement. Deliberate targeting. The deaths were not random. The evidence pointed toward a systematic progression through the family itself. That realization carried profound implications. This was not a crime driven by opportunity. It was a crime driven by intention. The victims had been selected. Known. Connected. Every new discovery reinforced the same disturbing conclusion. The family had been hunted. Investigators later described the challenge of processing such scenes. Professional detachment is essential. Emotion must be controlled. Tasks must be completed. Evidence must be preserved. Yet investigators are still human beings. Certain scenes leave lasting impressions. Scenes involving children often affect even the most experienced officers. Scenes involving entire families can be equally devastating. The Schleipfer murders contain both. A family destroyed. A child among the dead. Another child among the living. For many investigators, those realities remained impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, attention increasingly focused on one urgent question. Where was Brian Schleipfer? The answer mattered more than anything else. If he remained alive and armed, everyone on the property remained at risk. Police officers. Medical personnel. Neighbors. Potential survivors. No assumption could be made regarding his intentions. A person who had already killed multiple family members could not be predicted. Could he attempt escape? Could he ambush responders? Could he take hostages? Could he continue killing? The uncertainty transformed the search into a race against time. Additional police resources continued arriving. The operation grew larger. Perimeters expanded. Communication networks intensified. What had begun as an emergency response was evolving into a major manhunt. Across the farm, officers carefully advanced through paddocks, sheds, and outbuildings. The terrain itself complicated the effort. Unlike a city environment with defined boundaries, farmland offers countless hiding places. Tree lines, machinery sheds, drainage areas, storage buildings, natural depressions in the landscape. Each required attention. Each required caution. Hours passed. And still, Brian remained missing. The longer the search continued, the more tension increased. Every officer involved understood the same reality. A cornered individual can become even more dangerous. Especially someone who has already demonstrated a willingness to kill. The possibility of a confrontation remained very real. At the same time, investigators were trying to establish a clearer understanding of what had happened. The emergency call provided crucial information. Witness accounts were limited. Most of the people who knew the truth were dead. Physical evidence became the primary storyteller. Blood patterns, weapon locations, timelines, movement between structures. The scene itself began revealing the sequence of events. Slowly, piece by piece. Crime scene investigations are often portrayed as immediate revelations. Reality is different. Understanding develops gradually. Investigators collect fragments and build narratives. Each fragment matters. A footprint. A spent shell. A telephone left off the hook. A clock showing the moment routine stopped. The Schleifer property contained countless fragments. Each one contributing to a picture almost too terrible to comprehend. And then there was Linda, the sole survivor. While officers searched for an armed killer, they also located a frightened 9-year-old girl who had somehow endured the nightmare. Her survival immediately became one of the most important developments in the case. Not only because she needed protection, because she possessed information. She had witnessed events no one else could describe. She had lived through circumstances that investigators were still trying to understand. When police finally reached her, they encountered not merely a survivor but a child carrying memories that would remain with her forever. The emotional significance of that moment cannot be overstated. Imagine being one of the officers who found her. Imagine knowing that almost everyone she loved was gone. Imagine trying to provide reassurance in circumstances where reassurance barely seemed possible. Children often look to adults for answers. But what answers existed? How could anyone explain what had happened? How could anyone explain why? The officers could not undo the trauma. They could only protect her from further harm. And at that moment, protection became everything. As Linda was brought to safety, the investigation entered a new phase. The priority remained locating Brian. Yet investigators now possessed confirmation that at least one witness had survived. A witness whose perspective would help establish critical aspects of the timeline. A witness whose courage had already become extraordinary. The search continued. Hour after hour. Police expanded their efforts across the property and surrounding areas. The operation eventually involved more than 60 officers. That number alone illustrates the scale of the challenge. This was not a simple search. This was a coordinated effort involving significant manpower and resources. The possibility of armed confrontation remained ever present. Every officer entering a new section of terrain understood that Brian could be nearby. Watching. Hidden. Waiting. The uncertainty became exhausting. Psychologically draining. Danger is easier to confront when it is visible. Invisible danger creates constant tension. The mind never relaxes. Every shadow matters. Every unexpected sound draws attention. Every movement demands evaluation. The Schleifer search produced exactly that atmosphere. A vast landscape concealing unanswered questions. Eventually, after approximately 6 to 7 hours, the search reached its conclusion. Officers located Brian Schleipfer. He was dead. The manhunt ended not with an arrest, not with negotiations, not with a dramatic confrontation. It ended in silence. Brian had taken his own life with a firearm. The discovery brought immediate relief from a tactical perspective. The threat was over. No further victims would be created. No officers would face armed resistance. The danger that had dominated the day was finished. Yet relief quickly gave way to something else. Finality. Because Brian's death ensured that many questions would never receive direct answers. Investigators could examine evidence, analyze behavior, study circumstances. But they could never sit across from him and ask why. They could never challenge his explanations, never explore his reasoning, never fully understand the journey from family patriarch to family annihilator. That opportunity died with him. The discovery of Brian's body effectively closed the operational phase of the crisis. But it opened the deeper investigation. Now detectives faced a different challenge. Not finding the killer. Understanding him. Understanding what had happened inside the family. Understanding the chain of events that transformed a quiet farm into a mass murder scene. As the day drew toward evening, the Schleipfer property remained filled with investigators. Crime scene personnel documented evidence. Photographers preserved details. Detectives reviewed timelines. Supervisors coordinated resources. The farm had become something entirely different from what it had been that morning. The fields remained. The buildings remained. The fences remained. But the sense of home was gone. In its place stood one of the largest and most emotionally devastating crime scenes many investigators would ever encounter. And as darkness slowly returned to the countryside, one truth had become unavoidable. The killings were over. The killer was dead. Yet the hardest questions were only beginning. Because finding Brian Schleipfer explained who committed the murders. It did not explain why. And that mystery would soon become the central focus of the investigation that followed. By the time darkness settled over the Schleipfer property on May 20th, the immediate danger was gone. The victims had been found. The killer had been located. The manhunt had ended. Yet for investigators, the real work was only beginning. To the public, the case appeared straightforward. 6 members of a family had been killed. The person responsible was dead. There would be no arrest, no interrogation, no trial. Case closed. But experienced detectives knew better. Finding the person who committed a crime and understanding why they committed it are two very different things. The first question had already been answered. The second would become far more difficult. Because Brian Schleipfer had taken the most important evidence with him when he died. His explanation. His motive. His version of events. The following days transformed the farm into a center of investigation. Detectives arrived. Forensic specialists arrived. Photographers documented every room. Evidence technicians collected every item that might help explain what had happened. The property became a puzzle scattered across more than 100 acres. And somewhere within that puzzle investigators hoped to find answers. The first task was reconstruction. Not emotional reconstruction. Physical reconstruction. Minute by minute. Movement by movement. Investigators needed to determine exactly how the massacre unfolded. Which victim had been attacked first? Where Brian had gone next? How much time passed between each killing? What weapons had been used? What actions suggested planning and what actions suggested impulse? Every crime scene tells a story. The challenge is learning how to read it. In the Schleipfer case, the story that emerged was deeply unsettling. Evidence suggested that the violence had not exploded randomly across the property. Instead, it appeared to follow a progression. A sequence. a chain reaction beginning with one victim and spreading outward through the family. The pattern was important because it helped investigators understand Brian's state of mind. Random violence often leaves chaos behind. This crime left direction. The victims appeared connected by relationship, by proximity, by family. The murders were personal. That conclusion quickly shaped the investigation. But understanding the sequence still did not explain the cause. What had triggered the first act of violence? What transformed years of family life into a morning of bloodshed? The answer was not waiting neatly inside a police report. Investigators had to search for it among memories, conversations, family history, personal struggles. And that process introduced the first major challenge. Most of the people who understood the family best were dead. The individuals most capable of explaining recent tensions had become victims. The person capable of explaining his own actions was gone. What remained were fragments. Friends, neighbors, extended relatives, people who had observed the family from the outside, people who knew pieces of the story but not necessarily the whole story. Detectives began conducting interviews. They spoke with those who had interacted with Brian in the months leading up to the massacre. Some described a hard-working farmer. Others described a proud man. A man accustomed to responsibility. A man who had spent decades controlling his environment through effort and determination. None of those descriptions sounded unusual. None of them sounded like the profile of a mass murderer. That was precisely what made the case so troubling. Many family annihilators do not appear dangerous until after the violence occurs. Neighbors rarely say they expected it. Friends rarely predict it. Co-workers rarely see it coming. The gap between public appearance and private reality can be enormous. The Schleifer case appeared to fit that pattern. As interviews continued, investigators began hearing recurring themes. Depression, isolation, growing tension within the family, fear regarding the future of the farm. None of these elements alone explained 6 murders. Yet they continued appearing in conversation after conversation, like pieces of a larger picture slowly coming into focus. One of the strongest areas of interest involved the farm itself. To outsiders, land is property. To farming families, land can become something far more complicated. Identity, legacy, authority, purpose. Generational farms often carry emotional weight impossible to measure financially. Questions about ownership can become questions about self-worth. Questions about management can become questions about relevance. And questions about succession can become questions about mortality. Who takes over when the patriarch grows older? Who makes decisions? Who controls the future? Investigators learned that concerns regarding these issues may have existed within the Schleifer family. The exact details remained frustratingly incomplete. Too many voices had been silenced. But enough information surfaced to suggest that Brian feared losing control over aspects of the life he had spent decades building. That possibility intrigued investigators. Not because fear automatically leads to violence. Millions of people fear change without harming anyone. But in cases involving family annihilation, perceived loss of control often emerges as a significant factor. Some offenders reach a point where they view their entire world as collapsing. Financial pressure, emotional pressure, relationship pressure. The future begins looking threatening rather than hopeful. The individual becomes trapped inside a distorted perspective. A perspective that outsiders often cannot see. Investigators wondered whether Brian had reached such a point. Yet even that theory raised problems. Because no single event appeared dramatic enough to explain the massacre. There was no massive financial catastrophe. No public humiliation. No obvious crisis occurring immediately before the murders. The absence of a clear trigger created frustration. Every investigation depends on connections. Cause and effect. Action and reaction. In this case, the connections remained elusive. Then there was the issue of mental health. Multiple accounts suggested Brian had experienced periods of depression. Again, investigators approached the subject carefully. Depression does not create murderers. Most people suffering from depression never become violent. But severe, untreated depression can distort perception. It can change how a person interprets relationships, how they interpret setbacks, how they interpret the future. Detectives attempted to understand whether Brian's mental state had deteriorated beyond what others realized. Had family members noticed warning signs? Had friends noticed changes? Had there been conversations expressing hopelessness? The answers varied. Some people recalled concerns. Others remembered little that seemed alarming. That inconsistency became another dead end. The evidence suggested emotional struggles. The evidence did not fully explain mass murder. As investigators dug deeper, another question emerged. Had the killings been planned? Or had they erupted spontaneously? The distinction mattered. A planned attack suggests deliberation, preparation, time spent considering actions before carrying them out. A spontaneous attack suggests emotional explosion, a sudden collapse of self-control. Evidence appeared to contain elements of both possibilities. The initial confrontation with Jocelyn seemed linked to an argument. Yet the subsequent movement across the property suggested purpose, intent, determination. Investigators found themselves caught between competing interpretations. Perhaps the violence began impulsively and then evolved. Perhaps Brian crossed a line after the first killing and decided there was no way back. Or perhaps the argument merely ignited plans already forming beneath the surface. The truth remained hidden. And because Brian was dead, some questions could never be tested. The investigation eventually uncovered another significant detail. A note. Authorities located written material connected to Brian. The existence of the note immediately generated interest. Perhaps this was the answer. Perhaps this was the explanation investigators had been seeking. Perhaps the mystery was finally about to be solved. But reality proved less satisfying. The contents were never fully released to the public. And even within investigative circles, the note failed to provide a simple explanation. It offered clues, not certainty. Fragments, not closure. The existence of a note often creates the illusion that motives become clear. In reality, human beings rarely explain themselves completely, even when they try. Especially during moments of crisis. The note became another piece of the puzzle rather than the final solution. Meanwhile, detectives examined every possible alternative explanation. Had there been outside influences? Unknown conflicts? Hidden financial pressures? Secret disputes? Investigators followed leads wherever they appeared. Most went nowhere. One by one, potential explanations collapsed under scrutiny. The deeper they searched, the more the case returned to the same central themes. Family, control, depression, isolation, fear. Not one factor. Several. Interacting. Reinforcing one another. Building pressure over time. Yet even that framework felt incomplete. Because people wanted certainty. Communities want clear answers after tragedies. They want a single reason. A single moment. A single explanation capable of transforming chaos into understanding. The Schleifer case refused to provide that comfort. Months passed. Reports were completed. Evidence was reviewed. Experts analyzed the available information. And still, the fundamental mystery remained. Why that morning? Why those family members? Why did years of family life end in such unimaginable violence? The inability to answer those questions frustrated investigators as much as anyone else. Police are trained to solve crimes. This crime had technically been solved on the first day. Yet emotionally and psychologically, it remained unsolved. The person responsible was known. The motive was not. Forensic evidence could establish where people stood, not what they felt. Evidence could reveal actions, not thoughts. Evidence could identify weapons, not emotional wounds. Those limitations became painfully clear throughout the investigation. In the end, detectives reached conclusions rather than certainties. They believed Brian had been experiencing significant psychological distress. They believed family tensions likely played a role. They believed fear surrounding control of the farm and the future may have contributed. They believed increasing isolation intensified those struggles. But belief is not proof. And proof was exactly what the case lacked. The Schleipfer murders became one of those rare investigations where the central question survived long after the investigation itself ended. The evidence explained the mechanics of the tragedy. It never fully explained the heart of it. And as detectives reviewed their findings for the final time, another realization began emerging. The answers they sought might never be found in the past. Perhaps the most important question was not why Brian killed. Perhaps it was whether there had been warning signs before the killings. Signs hidden beneath routine. Signs overlooked by those around him. Signs that might help prevent another family from experiencing the same fate. That question would eventually lead investigators toward the most significant breakthrough of the entire case. Not a breakthrough that identified the killer, but a breakthrough that helped explain the path that led him there. Most investigations reach a moment when everything changes. A fingerprint. A confession. A witness stepping forward. A hidden piece of evidence finally uncovered. The breakthrough arrives, and suddenly a tangled mystery begins to make sense. The Schleipfer investigation was different. There would be no dramatic arrest. No interrogation room confrontation. No suspect slowly revealing his motives under the pressure of questioning. Brian Schleipfer was already dead. The traditional path toward answers had disappeared the moment investigators found his body. Yet as the months passed, detectives slowly realized that the breakthrough they were searching for was not hidden inside a single piece of evidence. It was hidden inside a pattern. A pattern formed by dozens of small details that, on their own, seemed ordinary. Together, however, they painted a disturbing portrait of a man whose internal world had been collapsing long before the first act of violence occurred. The breakthrough was not discovering who committed the murders. The breakthrough was understanding how a family patriarch became capable of committing them. As investigators revisited interviews, reports, personal accounts, and forensic findings, a clearer image of Brian began emerging. Not the Brian people casually knew. Not the farmer seen driving through the countryside. Not the grandfather appearing at family gatherings. A different Brian. A private Brian. A man increasingly consumed by fears he struggled to express. One of the most significant realizations involved the nature of control. For most of his adult life, Brian had occupied a position of authority. The farm had not simply been his livelihood. It had been his kingdom. The land responded to his decisions. The daily routines revolved around responsibilities he understood. His identity and the property had become inseparable. Many people underestimate how powerful that connection can become. Especially for individuals who spend decades building something from the ground up. The farm was not merely a business. It represented years of sacrifice. Years of physical labor. Years of waking before sunrise. Years of weathering financial uncertainty. Years of shaping a future with his own hands. To lose influence over that world could feel like losing part of himself. Detectives began hearing similar observations from different sources. Not accusations. Not dramatic revelations. Small comments. Small memories. Conversations that seemed insignificant before the murders. Comments about aging. Comments about change. Comments suggesting discomfort with the future. Each individual detail appeared harmless. Together they suggested something larger. Brian seemed increasingly unable to accept that life was moving into a new chapter. For many people, aging involves adaptation. Responsibilities gradually shift. Younger generations assume larger roles. Control becomes shared rather than absolute. Most families navigate this process imperfectly but successfully. The transition is rarely easy. Yet it happens. Investigators began wondering whether Brian viewed the transition differently. Whether he saw it not as a natural stage of life but as a threat. A loss. A defeat. The more detectives examined the evidence, the more that possibility gained weight. Then there was the issue of isolation. At first glance, isolation seemed like an unlikely factor. After all, Brian lived surrounded by family. Children nearby. Grandchildren nearby. People constantly moving across the property. How could someone be isolated under those circumstances? But emotional isolation often has little to do with physical distance. A person can sit in a crowded room and feel completely alone. A person can live among family members while believing nobody understands them. That possibility became increasingly important. Investigators found indications that Brian had withdrawn emotionally over time. Not necessarily disappearing from daily life. Not necessarily cutting off communication. Something more subtle. A growing separation between his inner world and the people around him. The kind of separation that often goes unnoticed until a crisis occurs. Looking backward, some people remembered moments differently. Comments that seemed unusual. Periods of sadness. Expressions of frustration. Concerns that perhaps should have received greater attention. But hindsight creates clarity that rarely exists in real time. That is one of the cruel realities of tragedy. Warning signs often become obvious only after disaster strikes. Beforehand, they blend into ordinary life. People have bad days. People complain. People become withdrawn. People struggle. Most never become violent. The challenge is knowing which signs matter. And in the Schleifer case, that distinction remained painfully difficult. Another important breakthrough emerged through psychological analysis. Investigators began examining the murders through the framework of family annihilation. This type of crime occupies a unique place in criminal psychology. Unlike many homicides, family annihilation is not usually driven by hatred alone. Nor is it typically driven by financial gain. Instead, it often emerges from distorted thinking. A mindset in which the offender no longer sees family members as independent individuals. Instead, they become extensions of the offender's own identity. Their lives become intertwined with his perception of success or failure. Their futures become linked to his fears. When that mindset deteriorates, the consequences can be catastrophic. The theory helped explain aspects of the Schleifer murders that had previously seemed confusing. Brian had not targeted strangers. He had not chosen random victims. He had focused on the people closest to him. The people most connected to the life he believed was slipping away. Investigators could not prove exactly what he thought. But the pattern suggested a terrifying possibility. That in his final hours, he viewed destruction as a form of control. If he could not preserve the world he knew, he would erase it. It was not a conclusion investigators reached lightly. Nor was it one they could ever confirm absolutely. But it aligned with evidence in ways other theories did not. Then there was the note. The mysterious document discovered after the murders. Publicly, very little was revealed. The secrecy fueled speculation for years. Some imagined a detailed confession. Others imagined a manifesto explaining everything. Reality was likely far less dramatic. Human beings rarely leave behind perfectly organized explanations for their actions, especially during emotional collapse. What mattered most was not the specific wording. What mattered was what the note represented. It demonstrated forethought, awareness, the recognition that something significant was about to happen. That realization influenced how investigators viewed the crime. The massacre no longer appeared solely as an explosion of rage. It appeared connected to deeper processes already underway. Processes that may have been developing for months, perhaps even years. The breakthrough also highlighted another uncomfortable truth. Many people had noticed pieces of the puzzle. Nobody possessed the entire picture. One person noticed mood changes. Another noticed withdrawal. Another remembered comments about the future. Another recalled tensions within the family. No single observation seemed alarming enough to trigger intervention. Collectively, however, they suggested significant distress. The problem was that nobody had access to the collective view. Each person saw only one fragment. The complete picture became visible only after investigators assembled all the fragments together. That realization haunted many involved in the case, because it raised questions with no satisfying answers. Could the tragedy have been prevented? Could someone have recognized the danger earlier? Could treatment have changed the outcome? Could intervention have saved lives? Those questions surfaced repeatedly. And unfortunately, they belong to the category of questions that can never be answered. Prevention exists in a world of possibilities. Investigations exist in a world of facts. The two rarely overlap perfectly. What investigators could say with confidence was that Brian's emotional and psychological state appeared significantly compromised long before the murders occurred. The violence itself was sudden. The deterioration leading toward it was not. That understanding became perhaps the most important breakthrough of all, because it challenged the popular belief that catastrophes emerge from nowhere. In reality, many disasters leave traces before they arrive. Tiny fractures. Tiny warnings. Tiny indications that something beneath the surface is beginning to fail. The Schleipfer case seemed to contain those fractures. They simply remained hidden within the ordinary rhythms of family life. As experts reviewed the findings, another pattern became clear. The murders were not solely about anger. Anger alone rarely explained such systematic destruction. Fear appeared equally important. Fear of change. Fear of losing relevance. Fear of losing authority. Fear of facing a future that looked unfamiliar. Fear can be a powerful force. Sometimes more powerful than anger. Because fear reshapes perception. It narrows possibilities. It creates enemies where none exist. It transforms uncertainty into threat. When combined with depression and isolation, fear can become profoundly dangerous. That combination increasingly appeared at the center of the Schleipfer tragedy. Not as an excuse. Never as an excuse. As an explanation. There is a difference. Explaining violence does not justify it. Understanding darkness does not make it acceptable. The purpose of investigation is not forgiveness. The purpose is truth. And the truth investigators uncovered was deeply unsettling. The massacre had not begun on May 20th. The killings began on May 20th. The conditions leading toward them had existed long before. The emotional collapse. The growing isolation. The fears. The tensions. The distorted thinking. Those elements formed the true beginning of the story. Months before the first victim died. Months before police arrived. Months before anyone understood what was coming. By the end of the investigation, detectives possessed a far clearer understanding of the path that led to the murders. Yet clarity remained incomplete. Some mysteries survived. Some questions remained unanswered. They always would. No amount of evidence could fully reconstruct another human being's mind. No investigation could retrieve conversations never spoken. No report could explain every thought that passed through Brian's head during those final hours. The breakthrough provided understanding, not certainty. And perhaps that was the most difficult conclusion of all. The Schläpfer murders would never fit neatly into a single explanation. They existed at the intersection of psychology, family dynamics, aging, depression, fear, and human vulnerability. The tragedy was not caused by one thing. It emerged from many things. Many pressures. Many struggles. Many unseen fractures. The investigation had revealed that much. But another challenge still remained. The public wanted justice. The victims deserved justice. The community needed justice. And yet the man responsible would never stand inside a courtroom. Never hear a verdict. Never face a sentence. The legal chapter of the story would therefore become unlike almost any other murder case. Because justice would have to be pursued in the absence of the killer himself. In most true crime stories, the investigation moves toward a familiar destination. A courtroom. The place where evidence is presented. Where prosecutors construct their case. Where defense attorneys challenge every detail. Where witnesses take the stand. Where victims' families finally sit face to face with the person accused of causing their suffering. The courtroom is where society attempts to restore order after chaos. It is where facts become judgments. Where accusations become verdicts. Where justice, however imperfect, seeks to make itself visible. But the Schläpfer case never reached that destination. There would be no trial. No jury. No cross-examination. No guilty verdict announced before a crowded courtroom. The man responsible had already passed sentence upon himself. By the time investigators completed their search of the property, Brian Schläpfer was dead. With a single gunshot, he had removed himself from the legal process. And in doing so, he left behind a different kind of burden. A burden carried by investigators. By surviving relatives. By the wider community. And most of all, by the lone survivor. Because while the killer escaped prosecution, everyone else was forced to live with the consequences. In legal terms, the case was straightforward. The evidence overwhelmingly established responsibility. The crime scenes. The timeline. The witness information. The physical evidence. Everything pointed toward the same conclusion. Brian Schläpfer had murdered 6 members of his family before taking his own life. There was no realistic alternative theory. No competing suspect. No unresolved question regarding identity. The investigation had achieved certainty on that point. Yet certainty of responsibility is not the same thing as justice. Justice involves accountability. It involves confrontation. It involves public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. And those elements became impossible the moment Brian died. Many investigators later reflected on the strange frustration that accompanies cases like these. The evidence can be perfect. The conclusions can be clear. And still something feels unfinished. Because criminal investigations are designed to lead somewhere. Toward arrest. Toward prosecution. Toward judgment. The Schläpfer investigation reached a wall. The legal system had nowhere left to go. As a result, much of the attention shifted toward official findings and public understanding. Authorities focused on documenting exactly what had occurred. Establishing an accurate historical record became essential. Without a trial, there would be no months-long public presentation of evidence. No courtroom testimony laying out the timeline step by step. The investigation itself became the primary mechanism through which truth entered the public record. Detectives worked carefully. Every conclusion needed support. Every statement required evidence. Every finding had to withstand scrutiny. The responsibility carried unusual weight. Because in the absence of a trial, their conclusions would become the closest thing the victims would ever receive to legal representation. The dead could not speak. The investigators had to speak for them. And they did. Report by report. Finding by finding. Evidence by evidence. A picture emerged. Not only of what happened on May 20th, but of the destruction left behind. 6 lives gone. 1 child surviving. An entire family line permanently altered. The community followed developments closely. The murders had shocked New Zealand. Partly because of their scale. Partly because of their brutality. But perhaps most importantly because of their familiarity. People recognized aspects of their own lives within the Schleifer family. A rural property. Generations living together. Family disagreements. Financial pressures. Aging parents. Adult children. Nothing about those circumstances seemed extraordinary. That familiarity created discomfort. If something like this could happen within the Schleifer family, people wondered, where else might hidden tensions exist? The question lingered. Communities often search for distance after tragedies. They want reassurance that what happened could never happen to them. The Schleifer case resisted that comfort. There were no obvious monsters. No secret criminal enterprises. No dramatic warning signs visible to everyone. There was simply a family. A family that collapsed from within. That reality forced difficult conversations. Conversations about mental health. Conversations about isolation. Conversations about aging and control. Conversations many people preferred to avoid. Yet the tragedy made avoidance impossible. In the months that followed, media coverage attempted to answer the same question investigators had confronted from the beginning. Why? Why would a grandfather destroy nearly everyone he loved? Why would a husband kill the woman who had spent decades beside him? Why would a father turn against his own children? The search for explanations became almost obsessive. Human beings dislike randomness. We crave reasons. Patterns. Logic. We want suffering to make sense. The Schleifer case offered only partial answers. Enough to understand some aspects. Not enough to eliminate the mystery. And perhaps that was one of the most painful realities for surviving relatives. There would never be a definitive explanation. No courtroom confession. No detailed testimony. No opportunity to ask questions. The man who possessed the answers had chosen silence. Permanent silence. Meanwhile, attention increasingly focused on Linda. The 9-year-old girl whose survival had become one of the most remarkable aspects of the entire case. In many murder cases, survivors play important roles during trials. They testify. They answer questions. They help establish facts. Linda would never experience that process. There would be no courtroom for her to enter. No witness stand. No jury watching her speak. Yet her experience remained central to understanding the tragedy. Because she represented something the murders failed to destroy. Survival. Hope. Continuity. Every family annihilation seeks total erasure. The offender attempts to eliminate an entire world. An entire family structure. An entire future. Linda's existence prevented that goal from being fully realized. The family story did not end on May 20th. Part of it survived. And that fact carried enormous symbolic importance. For investigators, for relatives, and for the broader public. The legal chapter of the case also raised important philosophical questions about justice itself. What does justice mean when punishment is impossible? Can truth itself become a form of justice? Can remembrance become justice? Can honoring victims become justice? The answers vary depending on who is asked. Some people believe justice requires consequences imposed by law. Others believe justice includes something larger. Recognition. Accountability. Historical truth. The Schleifer case ultimately relied on those broader forms. The killer would never face prison. But he would never escape identification. His actions would remain documented. Examined. Remembered. Not celebrated. Not excused. Remembered. There is significance in that distinction.